Good afternoon, my name is Brad Trammell. Everyone has an opinion about men right now. From the loneliness crisis to political polarization to relationship discourse, the modern man has become an object of intense cultural fascination and scrutiny. Most of what you hear on the subject is men and women defending their own side, which tends to produce exactly the kind of gender war discourse that makes everything harder to understand. This video tells a different story, one that starts not with men, but with work, with what happened when the jobs that organized masculine identity were shipped overseas, automated away, or replaced by something that required a completely different kind of person. What filled the vacuum was a new economy, a new workplace culture, a new set of expectations, and eventually a culture war that gave everyone someone to blame. It's a story about how college-educated men learned to perform contrition until everyone could see through their performance, about how the men who couldn't perform it retreated online and built something darker in response, about how the state decided the easiest way to manage discontent was to legalize every vice that makes it tolerable, about how women, surveying the wreckage, concluded they deserved better, and about how men, hearing that conclusion, decided there was no point. Like all great rom-coms, it's a story that'll have you laughing and crying in equal measure. This is The Man Report. Chapter 1. Becoming Yourself. For most of human history, biological differences between men and women pushed them towards different kinds of labor. Men mostly did extractive, competitive work outside the home, farming, hunting, building, fighting, while women took on pregnancy, childcare, and domestic upkeep. The male producer and female reproducer roles mutually reinforced one another. For thousands of years, women faced constant pressure to bear more children because families relied on a steady supply of young workers to survive subsistence living. In the mid-20th century, this division of labor reached its most nostalgized form. Each role made easier to perform once labor won concessions from capital. Unions capped work hours, standardized the weekend, and secured pensions, making it possible for husbands to earn what was called a family wage, capable of buying a home and supporting the entire family. At the same time, women's labor was eased by massive public investment in social infrastructure, public schools, hospitals, state-regulated utilities, reducing the burden of domestic upkeep and lowering infant mortality. Both men's and women's work was partially socialized, and the gains of industrial productivity were shared downward rather than exclusively hoarded upward, the outcome of organized labor and popular support for reproducing a functioning society. This temporary stability was viewed as a threat by the owners of capital, who responded by relocating American manufacturing abroad where labor was cheaper and less organized, promising a fool's bargain of inexpensive consumer goods in return for well-paid jobs. Offshoring marked America's transition from a blue-collar industrial economy to a white-collar professional one, what Barbara and John Ehrenreich called the professional managerial class, or PMC. Salaried workers who didn't own the means of production, but managed them on behalf of those who did. Capital got exactly what it wanted from offshoring, a permanent underclass of workers it owed nothing to. What Bayard Rustin called muscle power jobs, stable, middle-wage work that men without college degrees could rely on, moved overseas or saw wages steadily decline as union representation collapsed and the undocumented workforce that replaced them had no leverage to push back. As muscle power jobs gave way to office work, even basic strength requirements faded from most jobs, and second-wave feminists, pushing for contraception, legal abortion, and anti-discrimination laws, dismantled the remaining formal barriers to higher education and professional life for women. The legislation for equality was hard to argue with. Warren Farrell's quarrel was with the accompanying premise that men as a class had simply had all the power all along. Farrell's point was that, yes, men have long held the most visible positions of power as kings, presidents, and CEOs, but the average man has always lived under those same men, expected to send profit upward while also providing for his home. What looks like male dominance starts to resemble a two-tier system. A few men at the top and everyone else expected to endlessly work to provide. For most of American history, nobody offered men an alternative to that bargain. That is, until Playboy. The 1950s magazine didn't challenge the expectation that men should earn, it simply redirected where those earnings should go. Rather than providing for a wife and children, it suggested bachelors spend their money on personal gratification instead. By packaging art, culture, and high-end consumerism alongside sex, liquor, and cigars, it granted heterosexual men a permission slip to engage with pleasures the breadwinner role had left no room for. At its core was a reversal, Work wasn't something men enjoyed, it was simply something men endured, and Playboy gave them a different story about what their endurance was for. In half a century, changing cultural attitudes, a deindustrialized economy, and pro-feminist legislation quadrupled the proportion of women earning bachelor's degrees. And by the early 2020s, women had become the majority of both college graduates and the PMC workforce. Having already dismantled much of the industrial labor base, employers now enjoyed twice as many non-unionized applicants competing for the same jobs. Collective bargaining no longer protected your position. Credentials did, making men and women rivals from college admissions onward in a labor market that had reframed childbearing as a professional liability. By the 1980s, most families found themselves dependent on two salaries to maintain what one had previously provided. For the latchkey generation, that meant growing up in an empty home just so the family could afford to keep the house. In more affluent households, the domestic labor once done by a stay-at-home mom was often outsourced to immigrant women. The extent to which Americans were liberated from gendered roles is largely the extent to which that gendered labor was pushed down the class ladder and out of sight. As the need to perform traditional gender roles receded for the PMC, a new way of thinking about identity rushed in, as liberation from the left and bootstrapped self-invention from the right, both renouncing inherited roles and directing responsibility onto the individual, until it all condensed into a single message. You can be whatever you want. Become yourself. As Barbara Ehrenreich traces, the roots of becoming yourself ran deeper than pop culture, back to a shift in psychology in the 1950s, when a new doctrine of growth displaced the older model of maturity. The previous paradigm imagined life as a quick climb to a stable plateau, after which development was essentially complete. Instead, the human potential movement offered an endlessly ascending arc in which divorce, job loss, and even dying could be reframed as growth experiences. If human potential was intrinsically good and essentially unlimited, there is no firm ground from which to pathologize the deviant or the nonconformist. The old endpoint of maturity dissolved, replaced by Abraham Maslow's concept of self-actualization, not just managing adult life, but continuously realizing your fullest potential with no terminus in sight. It was a particularly intoxicating project for the college educated because it flattered their deepest vanity, the belief in the mind's total victory over the body. If every person was a blank slate, free from biology, hormones, and muscles, then self-actualization could always override the body. Even modest claims about differences between men and women became not just factually contested, but ideologically impermissible. What followed was a world in which, because you were building yourself from scratch, you no longer had any obligation to anyone but yourself. All relationships became voluntary and increasingly transactional, which aligned neatly with the needs of capital. Strong obligations to a partner, family, community, or nation are simply market inefficiencies. Tell people their highest responsibility is to become themselves, and the range of what they'll do for money and the products they'll buy radically expands. With individual self-expression as life's purpose, people began competing to prove they were fulfilling it, speedrunning through whatever taboos remained. This is how smashing cultural norms came to carry the same religiosity as upholding them once had. The trouble with becoming whatever you want is that few people have the time or imagination to invent a truly unique self. And even if they could, a truly unique identity would be incomprehensible to others, when recognition is most of the point. So, those who want to become themselves tend to adopt traits that are high status enough to signal distinction, but familiar enough to be appreciated. Paradoxically, the project of becoming yourself becomes a race for status, and the runners all converge. After half a century of mandatory self-invention, a pattern emerged. What was advertised as freedom quickly became exhausting. When there are no set rules, every expressive choice feels like a totalizing judgment of who you are, including the choice to conform to the roles you were told were behind you. Most heterosexual couples, even those publicly committed to dismantling traditional roles, still largely conform to familiar gender expectations, not because they're forced into it, but because it's what they want. The result is guilt about seeming to affirm what they've been taught to reject, and confusion about a past they've been taught was purely coercive. The thinking goes, if I'm freely conforming to these roles when I could choose to be anything, maybe they weren't as alien to human nature as I was told. Some, especially those who feel their social status is at stake, experience added pressure to queer their otherwise conventional heterosexuality through rhetorical bisexuality or political polyamory. Anyone who doubts how fully people are captured by compulsive norm smashing can look at the misery these arrangements so publicly produce. Cycles of jealousy and heartbreak, often compounded by an ideological need to stay flexible and distrust any emotional obligation resembling tradition.
How do you feel about your wife going on dates with other men? This is a question I've gotten asked a few times, and I can tell you it's an interesting experience. Leading up to it, I'm really excited and happy that she's going to meet somebody new. And then when she leaves, I do miss her. I'm not necessarily worried or scared or insecure about my relationship, but there is kind of this hole, I guess I can call it, or maybe it's a little bit of jealousy that she's getting to spend time with someone and it's not me, but it's not a bad thing.
For women, what began as a political struggle for the choice to pursue a career gradually hardened into a new obligation. Many moved from compulsory motherhood directly into compulsory self-invention. In defiance of Western traditions, they spiritually turned east. In defiance of the Christians who burned their grandmothers at Salem, they became witches. In defiance of the female body itself, they renounced it entirely and became aliens or otherkin. The latest destination in the project of becoming yourself has landed exactly where it started, the trad wife. After decades of compulsive norm smashing, the final feminine taboo became the self-aware embodiment of everything that was supposed to be left behind. Even the "I'm just a girl" memes register the same impulse, a safely ironic desire to be taken care of rather than endlessly optimized. But this return to traditional femininity functions less as a political belief than as a class position. As the working class now experiments with anime, gender bending, and polyamory, it's affluent, educated women who flirt with being trad. Subjugation rebranded as a luxury lifestyle for those who can still afford a single-income existence. Men reached this point of terminal exhaustion a bit earlier because the average man had always worked, making job-fueled self-actualization feel less like liberation and more like business as usual. Discussion tended to focus on what men lost rather than the obligations they were freed from. The sacrificial warrior role deflated without ceremony. The breadwinner role dissolved into a more equal but undefined gender dynamic. Where women were offered a positive vision of emancipation, men were largely handed a critique, told that most of their culture's aspirational representations of manhood were toxic, without being offered anything attractive in their place. For young men, the ideal of growth centered around traits like sensitivity, emotional availability, and self-reflection, traits that were, despite feminist campaigns to the contrary, recognizably feminine. Hence the negative view of all aspirational identities on offer. The beta, the cuck, the new male. To most men, these weren't aspirations so much as victim narratives that told a story of existential loss. A man whose relationship to his body is one of hobbyist vanity rather than survivalist necessity, whose new economy left him unable to expect to do as well as his father. Men unwilling or unable to pursue a college degree were left in low-wage, dead-end work with few outlets for aggression that didn't tilt towards self-destruction. The prototypical male conflict in culture was no longer man versus God or man versus nature. It increasingly became man versus himself. The provider role that had given even grinding, dangerous work a reason for being had disappeared and left nothing in its place but the suspicion that he no longer had a purpose. Chapter 2. The Longhouse. In the post-industrial economy, the tasks society most urgently needs, like manufacturing, teaching, nursing, social work, emergency response, are poorly compensated, while PMC roles that wouldn't be noticed if they vanished tomorrow, like brand management, derivative indexing, and inclusivity coordination, are handsomely rewarded. Employees quickly absorb the cynical lesson that meaningful work rarely pays well, and well-paid work is rarely meaningful. A manager scheduling 5 vaguely defined video call meetings in a single day usually isn't trying to complete anything so much as produce a paper trail that signals busyness up the chain of command. Witnessing this charade teaches everyone else that the core professional skill isn't technical competence, but social. Getting noticed, meeting the right people, navigating the room rather than the work. But it wasn't always this way. As Richard Sennett observed, most employees throughout history worked under a boss who exercised authority directly, barking orders over work itself, enforcing consequences face to face. The work was tangible. You either built the thing or you did it. You met the quota or you didn't. If you didn't like your boss's request, you could talk to your union rep, refuse and quit, or simply stay stoic about it. This directness was part of what was called honor culture, which emphasized open confrontation with those you were in conflict with. That directness is now gone, replaced by the fiction of a flat organization enforced by people who know exactly where everyone stands. Honor culture faded as corporations grew larger and more mediated by bureaucracy, making it impossible for bosses to personally interact with every employee, which is what created the opening for human resources as a middleman. On the surface, union representatives and HR staff shared the same stated function of workplace conflict resolution. But unions were built on the premise that workers and bosses have fundamentally conflicting interests, best handled through separate organizations with transparency about what was being negotiated. Unlike unions, HR is an extension of management. Its role is to downplay conflict and pressure employees into accepting what it presents as win-win solutions. HR is a two-party mediator that works exclusively for one party. With HR came a managerial style that avoided overt displays of authority precisely because its job was to protect those in power. The boss was rebranded as a team leader, a facilitator, or a lead partner. Workplace communication took on a disingenuously upbeat register that masked underlying tension.
So, Christian, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I am totally aligned. I think before we boil the ocean on this one, we should circle back on the core synergies and make sure we're not chasing low-hanging fruit at the expense of, the bigger play, right?
Right.
Let me follow up offline with a quick recap, and we can resync once everyone's had a few cycles to look over the larger initiative.
Wow, that sounds really great, Christian.
All right, yeah.
Impatient reminders became circling back. Urgent demands became time-sensitive. Punishable mistakes became misalignments. Even layoffs were laundered through softening language. HR notices assured employees that we're all contingent workers or we're all victims of time and place, framing change itself as the responsible agent so that no one could be held accountable. From hiring to firing, an HR intermediary absorbed confrontation and shielded leadership from ever having to justify itself. Maintaining the fiction of a corporate family also required employees to adopt a therapeutic mode of speech, usually reserved for children's counseling. What I'm hearing is, let's unpack that. This register doesn't come naturally to most people, so it's reinforced through peer surveillance, which is why some of the fastest growing and best compensated PMC roles are precisely those HR positions devoted to scrutinizing workers' identity and behavior. Most millennials come pre-equipped with an HR person that lives inside their own minds. As the first generation to grow up online, they learned early that anything you say can be misread, archived, and resurrected as evidence of moral failure. Punishment doesn't have to be common to be feared. It often works better when it's unpredictable. PMC advancement depends on constantly recalibrating to shifting norms and peer judgment. Your status never secure, only temporarily granted and just as easily revoked. As Musa Al-Gharbi argues, the safest way to avoid this ongoing scrutiny is to present yourself as already harmed.
Quick question. Can you tell me what category of fat I fit in?
So it's based on your shirt size. So if you are a 1 or 2X, you are small fat. 3 to 4X, you are mid fat. 5 to 6x, you are super fat, is based on what level of privilege you have in the world. So someone in a small fat category may not struggle getting on an airplane, but someone in a mid-fat or super fat may not be able to use even the airplane extender. So that's where that comes in, and like the privilege levels of like what fat means to different people.
If you appear pitiable enough to others, you become immune from further punishment. What sociologists call victimhood culture works exactly this way. Conflicts handled not through direct confrontation, but by appealing to third parties to intervene and validate. HR serves exactly this third-party function, listening to and affirming employee grievances while routing that information up to management. Those whose grievances touch on racial or gender identity are redirected into employee resource groups, diffusing potential discrimination lawsuits. Those whose grievances concern pay, working conditions, or safety are redirected toward the exit sign, pink slip and NDA in hand, before they can agitate any further. Helen Andrews calls this shift the Great Feminization, noting that today the majority of college graduates, professional workers, and the HR staff who oversee them are all women, and suggesting that changes in gender composition have driven wider cultural changes in the workplace.
Hi. And how are you?
I'm good, and how are you?
Yes.
Some weather we're having, huh?
Oh, and it is nice, and the birds.
And animals. I love animals. Yes.
And the dogs in the sky.
Yes, the dogs, the
Yes.
weather. Yes, how are you?
Good, and it's good.
How is the family?
Yes, so good.
Yes.
Others, like Jonathan Keeperman, have pushed this further through the metaphor of the longhouse, referencing the pre-modern domestic arrangement in which multiple families lived under conditions of constant proximity, observation, and matriarchal authority. But the longhouse metaphor misidentifies where victimhood culture actually came from. America's turn toward victimhood didn't begin in female-dominated spaces. It began with male-coded events, starting with the rehabilitation of Vietnam veterans as sympathetic PTSD sufferers after a lost war. More recently, it was elevated through the sacralization of 9/11's terrorized emergency workers as a pretext for waging forever war in the Middle East. Once victimhood became the most honorable role a man could claim, the rest of the culture followed. What is genuinely long-housed about modern work doesn't exclusively benefit women. There are plenty of guys perfectly cut out for it. It instead conscripts everyone into a style of labor historically expected of women, packaging yourself for display, seeking group consensus, and navigating power through the etiquette of empathy rather than direct conflict. Whether this feels alienating or empowering depends less on gender than on whether you've been trained, usually through college, to navigate it fluently. But the question of who lives in the longhouse is separate from the question of who designed it. The million women who flooded into HR roles over a single decade didn't appoint themselves. They were hired and empowered by mostly male corporate leadership. If the longhouse exists, it was built by someone else. The story of how starts not in the office, but in the university a decade earlier. The third awakening of the 2010s began with elite overproduction, fueled by the shift to direct federal lending in the 1990s, which paid schools whether or not a student's degree led to a paying career, making it rational to proliferate as many identity-affirming niches of education as possible alongside traditional professional programs. Every self-actualization journey was now an academic revenue stream. The 2008 financial crisis turned the most college-educated generation in history into the most indebted, unemployed, and likely to move back in with their parents. The student protests that followed were predictably self-interested, centered on loan forgiveness and identity affirmation rather than anything that might threaten the institutions producing them.
The exception is because other people have rights too, not just you.
Walk away. Walk away. He doesn't deserve to be listened to.
Unsafe space here for
I
all.
did not.
Stay quiet. For all standing students. You understand that? As your position as master, it is your job to create a place of comfort and home for the students that live in Silliman. You have not done that. By sending out that email, that goes against your position as master. Do you understand that? Then
No, I don't agree with that.
Then why the fuck did you accept the position?
Because
Who
I have
the
a
fuck hired you?
I have a different
You
vision
should
than you.
step down! If that is what you think about being a master, you should step down! It is not about creating an intellectual space! It is not! Do you understand that? It's about creating a home here! You are not doing that.
You're supposed to be our advocate.
You should be at the event last night when you hear a froggg say that she doesn't know how to create a safe space for her freshmen in Silliman. How do you explain that? These freshmen come here, they think this is what Yale is? Do you hear that? They're gonna leave, they're gonna transfer because you are a poor steward of this community. You should not sleep at night. We're out, we out. You're disgusting.
Social media introduced something new into this frustrated, underemployed class. More access to an audience and more incentive to perform altruistic beliefs as publicly and dramatically as possible. Its trouble was, no one could agree on what had caused the crisis they were all living through. The first answer was democratic socialist. American decline, it argued, came down to exploitation. A financial elite had captured the economy, run scams, started wars, and enriched themselves, while everyone else lost ground on housing, healthcare, and education. Its universalist solution was to unite all the people getting ripped off around their common interests, use the leverage of the working majority to take back political power from capital, and redistribute the gains to everyone. The second, woke narrative, embraced what academics called the cultural turn, the idea that American decline wasn't driven by profit-seeking, but by entrenched discrimination baked into the culture itself. Rather than mobilizing workers around shared economic interests, contemporary liberals used elite cultural institutions like media, academia, NGOs, and entertainment as a way to name and shame, treating cultural re-education as the primary instrument of social change. The call-out, the difficult conversation, the public accountability moment, scolding people is what they meant by doing the work.
Now, if you do not listen to her, your event will be shut down right now. Right now. Your decision. Make a decision now.
One day. Mike. Okay. Okay. All right. So we are trying to be reasonable. We are trying to be reasonable. We are trying to be reasonable.
We are reasonable.
We are trying. We're gonna give you. We're gonna let.
By 2020, wokeness had achieved total victory over the democratic socialist narrative, where redistribution would have required material concessions from ownership. Wokeness offered something far cheaper, a path to legitimacy for what were often deeply unpopular institutions, allowing them to police themselves and position their internal culture as the site of reform. Sorry, unionization would force the company to divert resources away from diversity initiatives. Sorry, higher wages don't provide the kind of customized recognition our in-house employee resource groups do. Sorry, pushing Medicare for all would alienate the moderate voters we need to protect our most vulnerable communities. In each case, material requests were rejected as an ethical impossibility rather than a managerial choice. But this pacification wasn't merely symbolic. Over 1 million well-paying HR, DEI, and corporate social responsibility jobs were created, absorbing erstwhile radicals into the very institutions they'd been criticizing, giving them a salary, a title, and a mandate to enact their vision in ways that conveniently never threatened the bottom line. As Jen Pan has shown, HR and DEI's stated purpose of making workplaces more hospitable to non-white workers, women, and other protected classes didn't actually work out that way. Turned out the best way to get people to get along was simply by paying them more. Instead, mandatory diversity training, rigid identity tests, and grievance sessions not only failed to get non-white workers and women promoted to upper management, they actively inhibited it, and often generated animosities between workers that didn't previously exist. In fact, many companies created such a personnel mess that they had to bring in additional diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging consultancies to repair the damage the first round had caused. As this suggests, one reason for the rapid growth of DEI-adjacent roles is that they tend to be self-replicating. HR is one of the fastest growing occupations in America. Diversity and inclusion is its fastest growing subdiscipline. And one of the primary tasks of diversity professionals is expanding job opportunities, including disproportionately in diversity work itself. The primary role of these jobs is to create more jobs like their own. HR isn't the only category of bullshit make work, and women don't hold a monopoly on it. The pinnacle of modern masculinity is selling scam courses and investment guides. The ZERP era conjured whole companies into existence that produced nothing and employed everyone. The difference is that HR jobs carry an explicitly political purpose. So, when you add 1 million of them to the economy, the cultural effect is far more pronounced than all the other bullshit jobs whose occupants are desperately trying to go unnoticed. HR jobs were designed to be seen, and they do have a real function, preventing unionization and protecting the company from discrimination lawsuits. That means producing enough highly visible diversity days, inclusion initiatives, and ethnic acknowledgements that when a claim reaches court under Title VII, the company can point to its paper trail of allyship and argue it's beyond legal reproach.
Hello and welcome to Microsoft Ignite. We've got a big day ahead and lots in store for you. First, we want to acknowledge that the land where the Microsoft campus is situated was traditionally occupied by the Sammamish, the Duwamish, the Snoqualmie, the Suquamish, the Muckleshoot, the Snohomish, the Tulalip, and other Coast Salish peoples since time immemorial. A people that are still here, continuing to honor and bring to light their ancient heritage. My name is
Woke gestures are cheap compared to litigation or regulation. It's why everyone from MSNBC to Chase Bank eagerly embraced diversity pledges while aggressively resisting any nudge toward unionization. But wokeness wasn't simply imposed from above. It also proved far more popular than the Bernie-style alternative among college-educated activists. The redistributive dream of holding elites to account was always undercut by the fact that many of those self-tasked with doing the holding ultimately wanted to be elites themselves. So while they might have chanted, "We are the 99%, the sense of loss they were responding to wasn't that the 1% existed. It was a lament about their own stalled path toward joining the top 20%. Many of these strivers, especially those in cultural fields, directly depended on millionaire and billionaire patrons to sustain their careers. Redistribution carried a built-in hazard. It threatened to dry up the patronage of the capitalist class that funded them. Wokeness prevailed among activists for the same reason it appealed to capital. It offered a path forward that preserved the possibility of selective upward mobility. They didn't want to overthrow the existing order. They just wanted to secure their place within it. Unlike the redistribution narrative, which had always had a queasy relationship with its proponents' wealth, wokeness reframed self-interest as the fulfillment of its aims. Careerism was the same as activism, was the same as the existential project of becoming yourself. A perfect alignment that made climbing the ladder feel not like selling out, but like doing the work. In this identitarian view, even a billionaire could never stop being a marginalized victim. Permanently cast as a stand-in for their entire race, gender, or sexuality, their individual success was framed as a collective win for all those who remained impoverished and vulnerable. The contradiction was captured in the oxymoronic phrase diverse individual, where one person's rise was taken to reflect the condition of everyone else like them, as if identity functioned as a monolith. Hence sayings like, "My existence is an act of resistance," or "It's radical for my body to take up space." Declarations that appoint the speaker as a one-person protest movement by virtue of having the bravery to collect a paycheck. Doing well for yourself became the same thing as doing good in the world. Even when woke movement leaders were caught stealing charitable donations or running fake GoFundMes for personal gain, there was relatively little consequence, because by then, personal enrichment and activism had become indistinguishable. So long as a marginalized person was being compensated for their victimhood, the means of acquiring that compensation was beside the point. This is why the 2010s Great Awakening never led to a meaningful improvement in the lives of the truly marginalized it so vocally scolded others on behalf of. Only a reshuffling among their already upwardly mobile representatives working office jobs. The awakened PMC wanted to be both professional elites and egalitarians, so long as their rhetoric never interfered with their ability to climb the ladder. Chapter 3. One of the good ones. Now, you might be listening to this and thinking to yourself, Wait a second. Someone was being asked to make a genuine sacrifice here. Someone was told to sit down, step aside, be silent, and listen on behalf of others. And that's true. Much of the Great Awakening wasn't simply about uplifting diverse individuals. It was also about bringing down cis-hetero, neurotypical, able-bodied white men, an impulse that intensified dramatically after the election of Donald Trump, to the extent that discrimination was understood to be the sole cause of American decline. There was only one perpetrator. This guy, or this guy, or this guy. This impulse to blame working class men reveals something important about wokeness's relationship to its own failures. When liberals lose elections, the diagnosis is never that the messaging was wrong, the policy is unpopular, or their candidates uninspiring. The fault always lies with the voters, who are too culturally backwards, too stupid, too irredeemably bigoted to deserve what was being offered. Every defeat becomes a vindication, proof not of political failure, but of moral superiority. For all their talk of protecting democracy, the liberal worldview is built on a mistrust of ordinary people that is curdled, over time, into open contempt. For over a decade, journalists, activists, NGOs, celebrities, politicians, entertainers, artists, and advertisers all converged on the same diagnosis. Whiteness and maleness were the root cause of everything wrong with America, and the indictment didn't stop at willful prejudice. These men were said to be predisposed by birth to perpetuate violence against others, whether they intended to or not. Some took this logic to its conclusion and offered extinction as the only reliable solution. This kind of omnivillain is a textbook case of René Girard's theory of the scapegoat. In periods of intense competition over limited status or resources, like the elite overproduction preceding the 2010s awakening, societies stabilize themselves by assigning blame to a single figure. Conflict is displaced rather than resolved, with the scapegoat absorbing collective frustration and coming to represent all social disorder. What made this particular scapegoat so useful was that it was deliberately stripped of class analysis. The problems being assigned to white men had specific nameable causes: stagnant wages driven by offshoring and union suppression, unaffordable housing produced by speculative investment and financialization, gutted public services from 40 years of austerity, a broken healthcare system sustained by insurance and pharmaceutical monopolies. By recasting these failures as the products of identity rather than policy, the actual architects of American decline were free to rebrand themselves as allies in the fight against discrimination. This norm became so naturalized that hatred of men rarely needed a racial qualifier. It was automatically understood that any journalist, celebrity, or t-shirt expressing contempt for men was referring to the only subgroup it was permissible to recreationally hate. The fact that white women eventually became targets too was a measure of the cultural campaign's success. White women, long positioned as fellow victims of white male patriarchy, were recast as collaborators through Karen memes, white feminism critiques, and the 53% statistic. After the 2024 election, commentators were quick to suggest Latino and black men were also new inductees into the increasingly diverse coalition of white male supremacy. But whatever the expanding cast of villains, white men remained the load-bearing wall of this entire structure. By repeatedly casting them as the non-falsifiable force behind every societal ill, the Great Awakening also ended up crediting them with a kind of totalizing influence. The more evil they were, the more Western civilization was credited as their singular achievement. Perhaps because the entire premise was implicitly flattering to them, much of the scapegoating of white men was carried out by none other than white men themselves. As Freddie DeBoer notes, PMC white men routinely and publicly denounced their own identity group as a way of securing an exemption, positioning themselves as one of the good ones. But once you make exceptions, you're no longer criticizing white men as a class. You're just criticizing the unenlightened ones, the deplorables who make you look sympathetic by comparison. It's a cynical ploy that looks like self-critique, but really functions like self-promotion. Like all liberal confessions of privilege, these weepy, premeditated apologies took the form of a humble brag, criticizing yourself as a knowing display of abundance and power. Boy, I sure have it all, and don't I feel awful about it? The irony is that these good ones often mocked men's rights activists for saying not all men, even as their own careers became one long, polished version of saying the same thing, just on their own behalf. Many liberal white men enthusiastically participated in a cultural climate rhetorically hostile to their identity because they believed they could outmaneuver it. Each saw himself as the exception. Far from timid cucks, their underlying confidence was so great that they assumed they could enter hostile territory and still win the degree, the job, the girlfriend. They believed their college-educated status took priority over their identity scapegoat status, and for many of them, it did. What was being enacted wasn't total exclusion of men, just a sorting mechanism designed to push the bad ones to the bottom of the pile. Whether elite cultural institutions discriminated against white men during the Great Awakening is a debate that produces two equally useless camps: those who deny anything changed at all, and those who insist every white man was purged and left destitute. Both are wrong. To understand what actually happened, you have to hold four seemingly contradictory truths in mind at once. The first is straightforward. After Trump's election in 2016, and especially after the BLM summer of 2020, hiring committees increasingly treated diversity as a central evaluation criterion, sometimes explicitly, other times through mandatory diversity statements that functioned as a legal loophole to fill quotas. Even the good ones were less likely to secure an Ivy League humanities position, publish fiction in the New Yorker, or exhibit in the Whitney Biennial. This doesn't require casting young white men with MFA degrees as world historical victims, only admitting what was broadly understood but seldom said out loud, that in many of these contexts, they were met with some version of, your voice just isn't what the world needs right now.
Certainly, there have been times where, there's no way we're hiring a white male person.
Just kind of unspoken.
There are times when it's spoken, but
how would they say it?
there's no way we're hiring a white male person. They'd say
Like straight to you, or okay?
They'd be very careful how they message that.
This doesn't conflict with a second reality, that many older white men remain firmly in control of elite cultural institutions throughout the same period. The majority of tenured faculty, chief curators, lead editors, and top managers were still older white men who had risen to leadership before the Great Awakening and continued to preside as it unfolded. As Jacob Savage notes, many of these senior figures preserved their positions precisely by championing diversity quotas, leveraging their authority to hire women and people of color as proof of being one of the good ones, allowing them to secure institutional legitimacy in a way that younger male applicants simply couldn't. The numbers at prestige media outlets tell the story. These two truths don't conflict with a third reality, which is that the total pool of all these ultra-elite cultural jobs represents an infinitesimal share of overall economic life. If you added up all the money dedicated to woke hires in prestige media, sales and contemporary black figurative painting, identity politics adjunct positions, and every similar niche that benefited most from these hiring shifts, the sum would be negligible in the broader economy. Plus, most of the women and people of color who gained access to these opportunities belonged to the exact same class and social networks as the young white men who were passed over. What was being contested was a narrow band of cultural capital and income among a small, class-identical group whose social networks were largely indistinguishable. These three truths don't conflict with a fourth reality, that even if these jobs account for a small share of economic capital, they exert a disproportionately large influence over how culture is understood. The overlapping fields of art, NGOs, journalism, and entertainment function as the most accredited sources people turn to when interpreting contemporary reality. While hiring 100 woke journalists over a decade barely registers at the level of GDP, an 800% increase in the use of woke language in the New York Times can meaningfully shape how an influential segment of the public perceives the world. If you apply that same exponential shift to most magazines, art museums, films, and television, you can create the impression of total cultural consensus from what is, in reality, a fairly small set of elite interests. Culture is the primary mechanism through which status gets assigned, which means that its influence matters far beyond its economic footprint. Unlike economic capital, status is intrinsically zero-sum. As Musa Al-Gharbi notes, you could, in theory, distribute money evenly enough that everyone lives comfortably, but a world where everyone held equal status would be a world without status at all. for one person's status to rise, another person's must fall. This helps explain how, from the 2010s onward, even a guy who never went to college could scroll through Facebook headline after headline and reasonably feel that something was being taken from him. Not necessarily his income, but his standing, his place in the world. You don't have to believe that a woke cancel squad is coming for your blue-collar job to feel that the categories you belong to are being reframed in ways that leave you worse off than before. And crucially, that feeling wasn't conspiratorial or paranoid. It was an accurate reading of the stated agenda of the most powerful institutions. On the other hand, for the college-educated men whose ambitions were tied to elite institutions, the cultural shift left two choices. You can either adapt or exit. Some who exited moved into open-entry, attention-driven work. Podcasting, newsletters, Substack, YouTube, Patreon, anonymous Twitter accounts, where attention could be converted directly into income and status. Others exited toward high-volatility financial speculation. Crypto, NFTs, meme coins, retail stock trading, Discord investment groups. One built clout, the other placed bets. Though the bookish Bernie bro on Substack and the braggadocious Bored Ape promoter may seem like opposites, they belong to the same continuum of post-awakening men who concluded they had better odds going straight to market than climbing institutions actively trying to decenter them. Yet, in the spaces where they were grouped, podcasting, crypto, and other open entry fields, they were soon criticized for the bro-heavy culture that emerged and encouraged, once again, to decenter themselves. The implicit demand wasn't simply that men vacate elite institutions, it was that they avoid forming majorities anywhere else either. Nothing crystallizes this more clearly than the ongoing "where's the liberal Joe Rogan media hunt," which misunderstands its own problem. Over the past 15 years, any left-leaning guy with enough ambition or naivety to build a majority male audience has already done so independently, often by openly criticizing Democratic policy, effectively emptying the party's bench of anyone capable of the job. But the deeper issue is that you can't categorically demonize the tastes and spaces associated with majority male audiences as being toxic, while also pining for a male figure who can successfully build a majority male audience. Even if a liberal Joe Rogan emerged, the project would automatically be disqualified as problematic for not making space for every other identity. It's a catch-22. Could a liberal media project aimed at capturing young men create a show that somehow also decentered them and their interests? The question collapses in on itself by asking for something that runs directly against the culture that produced the demand for it in the first place. Most good ones chose to adapt to the changing times. At the height of wokeness, many adapters simply chose not to voice even minor disagreements with dominant institutional views. The era's endless procession of easily repostable slogans proved especially useful. Resharing whatever the dominant woke position happened to be that week signaled alignment with institutional values without requiring any further engagement with the ideas behind it. This was useful because many of the era's positions on identity were often nonsensical or inconsistent, verging on mysticism. Race was described as a social invention with no biological basis, yet also treated as fixed and immutable, something you could never change or opt out of without causing deep offense. Gender and sexuality were described as fluid and socially shaped, yet also framed as something you were innately born as and could never have socially imposed on you from the outside. In that kind of environment, where the same subject flipped between social construction and biological determinism depending on who was speaking, the safest approach was to stick to the broadest established script. Take, for example, the many liberal men who strongly affirmed that trans women are women, a slogan that in practice signaled support for norms of respect, but few seemed to mean it literally. Men who were romantically interested in women rarely treated trans women and cisgender women as interchangeable when it came to dating or marriage, even while publicly endorsing their inseparability. This gap between public affirmation and private behavior is what sociologists call preference falsification. And it was everywhere. Yet many of these same good ones would still reprimand anyone who openly acknowledged a distinction between these two categories, even a distinction their own behavior implicitly confirmed. This was the evangelical approach to adaptation, aggressively policing anyone who strayed from the consensus as a measure to conceal their own inconsistencies. For the evangelist, it didn't really matter whether the cause they promoted aligned with their own behavior or even advanced its stated goal. Many good ones embrace calls to defund the police as a way of signaling solidarity with Black Americans, even though the idea was unpopular among Black voters themselves. The queer revolution of the past 15 years tells a similar story. While the number of gay men and lesbian women remained fairly steady, the biggest growth in queer identification came from young women identifying as bisexual. Pew Research finds that roughly 9 out of 10 bisexual identified women are in opposite-sex relationships. GSS data shows that most bisexual women under 30 have only had male sex partners. The identity expanded dramatically, the behavior, by the numbers, did not.
We're bisexuals. We're going to talk about hating men, but then unfortunately still date them.
We're bisexuals. We're going to have 3 drinks at once and still be dehydrated.
We're bisexuals. Of course we stand enough.
We're bisexuals. We could date women, but we don't know how to talk to them.
We're bisexuals. We have boyfriends.
If you go through the defining positions of the era, preference falsification comes up time and time again. The same folks that vocally criticized the traditional family and monogamy were most likely to have come from one and to go on to form one. The same folks that criticized wealth inequality and segregation were most likely to live in communities more segregated than those of Republicans. The same folks that reported the healthiest upbringings and highest test scores were most likely to adopt the language of mental disability upon acceptance to an Ivy League university. The same folks that evangelized healthy at every size fat positivity are now the most likely to be using GLP-1s for weight loss. The pattern reflects what Rob Henderson calls luxury beliefs, positions that confer status on their holders without requiring them to live out the reality they prescribe to others. In the short term, pressure to adapt created an exaggerated perception of liberal consensus. But over time, this widespread preference falsification bred a deeper cynicism toward everyone's public personas. The thinking goes, if I know I'm partly lying about what I claim to believe, then many of my peers saying the same things must be lying too. Having made performers of ourselves, we began to see performers everywhere. The performative male is preference falsification as an aesthetic, a scapegoat for the collective guilt of liberal performativity, someone onto whom everyone could project the bad acting job they also practiced. If the millennial man in a "the future is female" t-shirt was telling you he was one of the good ones, the Gen Z performative male is showing you by reading Angela Davis in public, nails painted, matcha in hand. You'd think this cultivated display of feminist allyship would work, and for a time it probably did, but it's since soured into an internet meme of insincere tryhardism. The performative male's most unforgivable crime is that he's given liberal women exactly what they said they wanted, forcing them to confront the banality of their own desire. In trying to be soft, approachable, non-threatening, stylish, and politically aligned all at once, he produces a version of himself so perfectly calibrated to women's stated preferences that it reads as a focus group result, overdetermined in a way that invites suspicion rather than trust. The performative male's cousin, the safe horny guy, solves this conundrum by using approved forms of transgression to signal authenticity, breaking up an otherwise unbroken pattern of deference by doing something women are nominally supposed to find offensive, but not offensive enough to actually cause offense. First, the safe horny guy commits the transgression of outwardly displaying male sexual desire, automatically presumed to be unwelcome and harassing, but only by immediately pairing it with signals that affirm non-traditional beauty standards, male weakness, or female dominance. I need a tall, emotionally unavailable art hoe to ruin my life. A mean bisexual barista could save me by spitting in my coffee. I want a thick goth muscle mommy to step on my balls so bad. What is aggressive about unprovoked horny posting is made safe through its ultimately submissive posture. What all these postures share, from the good one to the performative male to the safe horny guy, is the same basic structure, a performance of feminized deference calibrated to extract social rewards, which tends to work until the calibration becomes visible. Once the underlying motive is discovered, the goodwill it generated sours into something worse than if the performance had never been attempted. People forgive self-interest more readily than they forgive the pretense of selflessness, which suggests that saying what you actually think and accepting the consequences is not only the ethical choice, but the strategic one, and, more or less, the definition of having a self in the first place. Chapter 4. Men Going Their Own Way. Whether a millennial man experienced the Great Awakening as an opportunity or a threat depended largely on his proximity to the world producing it. The downwardly mobile men who existed outside PMC environments encountered the era's hectoring headlines and infographics at face value, with no access to the social or economic rewards that made performed contrition a useful ruse. This created an odd dynamic where the loudest woke evangelists were often the most cynical, while those furthest from its centers of power took its rhetoric the most literally and responded to it the most bitterly. Online, that bitterness found a home. 4chan was one of the early Web 1.5 platforms that set out to change what it meant to be lonely online. Founded in 2003 by Christopher Moot Poole, it was a user-generated image-posting message board inspired by Japan's 2channel, a space built around the shared experience of social withdrawal, where lonely young men teased, provoked, and commiserated through their shared alienation, eventually becoming a place where millions of young men could be alone together. Unlike nascent social media or earlier BBS culture, 4chan's boards were anonymous. Posts weren't ranked by the clout of the poster, but by the frequency of responses, ensuring that only the funniest, cruelest, and most sensational threads stayed on the front page before everything was deleted shortly thereafter. This made 4chan an accidental training ground for virality, teaching its posters the mechanics of mass attention online before memes and clickbait became household words. 4chan's anonymity had two downstream effects. First, anonymity flattened the usual markers of status. No name, no face, no credentials, giving anyone who felt like less than nothing an equal shot at being heard. Second, it bred a 1990s-style nihilism that would define the boards for years to come. No one knows my name, everything gets deleted anyway, oh well, whatever, never mind. Without organizational structure, 4chan spent years testing its collective potential through what were called raids, group actions where thousands of anonymous users coordinated to harass, shame, and pile on the same person or institution, inadvertently inventing the cancellation campaign years before it had a name or politics. Many raids indulged their nihilistic impulses, selecting teenage girls and suicide victims' families for mass ridicule, punching down at the few available people more vulnerable than themselves, which said everything about how low they already viewed themselves. Alternatively, campaigns against the Church of Scientology and major corporations carried a genuine sense of purpose, enacting revenge on behalf of the voiceless against the powerful. These actions crystallized into Capital A Anonymous, a loosely organized hacking collective that mobilized through 4chan to oppose institutions seen as hostile to free speech. For a brief moment, the board's collective energy pointed outward and even upward. Some Anons began working on hygiene, grooming, fitness, and cultural self-education, aspiring to become, as the meme had it, le gentleman. Then the FBI arrived, infiltrated Anonymous, and arrested its most skilled hackers. Decapitated, the movement fractured. Many remaining members left 4chan to join the Occupy Wall Street protests of 2011. With the moral fag alternative gone, the board's residual optimism collapsed, leaving the nihilist rearguard in sole possession of 4chan's culture, and nothing left to point their knives at but themselves. Even the ostensibly self-improving board settled into a self-destructive loop. Requests for communal feedback devolved into finding new ways to hate themselves. The group dynamics governing these exchanges were just anonymized and therefore more brutal versions of a familiar bias, the instinct to trust the worst thing anyone says about you over the kindest. A cruel assessment has no social motive to flatter you, which makes it feel objective, which makes it feel like the truth. Low self-esteem posters then did the rest themselves, actively seeking out feedback that confirmed their worst self-assessments. Over time, that impulse toward negativity inspired its own theorization. Originating from the pickup artist community, the sexual marketplace value chart exists somewhere between male astrology, evolutionary psychology, and eugenics, assigning every person a score from 1 to 10 based on looks, wealth, status, and personality, with the premise that in a just world, these scores would distribute evenly enough that everyone finds a match. 10s with 10s, 5s with 5s, and so on. But this balance is disrupted by women's hypergamous tendency to date up, seeking male partners who are more attractive, higher status, or wealthier than themselves. This creates a structural imbalance where a small number of high-value chads have access to the most women, a large middle tier is mostly ignored, and the bottom tier is said to be permanently excluded from the dating market. Dating apps make this feel even more true than it is. Reducing the entire process to a single swipeable photo encourages exactly the kind of cold marketplace thinking the SMV chart depends on. But the problem comes down to the idea of being permanently excluded from the dating market. This is the load-bearing term, the black pill of the SMV chart. The idea that your place on the chart is an immovable identity you were born into, making you a victim of biological discrimination rather than someone navigating difficult but improvable social circumstances. The incel's conception of himself as forever alone depends on this leap from I am struggling to I was always going to struggle and nothing I can do can change that.
Here we are again. I didn't think I was going to have to make this video again. But unfortunately, it's become apparent to me that you just haven't learned. You're still living in fucking La La Land. Little fantasy world where everything's gonna be okay, everything's gonna get all better. Let me tell you something, buddy. It's not gonna happen.
Like the progressive stack, Anand celebrated the virtue of the most marginalized among them, the 30-plus-year-old wizard who had never had sex, the stone-cold truecell who had never so much as touched a woman, the otaku without a single friend. As Dale Baran observed, the endless beta cuck jokes and chicken tendies memes revealed exactly who was posting them. People so defined by their lack of status that they could only approach it through therapeutic play. The humor had always been a way to express wounded misery at a safely ironic distance, but with each iteration, that distance collapsed, perhaps no more literally than in the cum jars they began posting as physical testaments to their own loneliness. Posters stopped cloaking their anger and sarcasm and simply confessed their resentments outright in black-pilled green texts. Promises of murders, suicides, and mass shootings had always circulated on the boards, but now they were becoming incrementally more common and incrementally more real. If you genuinely believe there is no hope for love, connection, or a better life, one answer is to become a mass shooter because you feel nothing but rage and need somewhere to aim it. The choice of location is never random. It's always somewhere pro-social. The school where you were picked on, the movie theater where people go on dates, the mall where people shop for loved ones you'll never have, the campuses where people sort themselves into the happy adult lives the chart already told them they could never access. People always ask, why don't incel mass shooters target someone actually evil? Why don't they ever pull a Luigi and go after a pharmaceutical CEO or a hedge fund manager? The answer is that their grievance isn't rooted in an analysis of capital, but in an existential belief about fate. That the world's joy is a zero-sum hierarchy, and that anyone experiencing love or ordinary happiness has obtained it at their expense, through the same cosmic lottery that condemned them to suffer at the bottom. Their protest is against God, punishing random innocence as a mirror of what they believe was done to them. In this nihilism, the only belief that remains is the recognition they expect to receive after death, a martyrdom among fellow members of what's functionally a suicide cult. The Matrix gave them a template for that fantasy, the idea that the physical world is fake and illegitimate, and that its illegitimacy can only be transcended through violence. In their minds, only through violent death could they finally escape anonymity and become someone real on a computer screen. Chapter 5. The Manosphere. Very few red-pilled loners actually subscribe to a level of murderous nihilism. Most see their low status as socially constructed rather than cosmically ordained, which means they still hold out hope that they can personally ascend or change society enough to rectify their grievance. The manosphere is where that grievance gets organized into a set of overlapping self-help strategies, each pointing men on a different course of action depending on where they ideologically locate the source of the problem. The pickup artist believes the problem is social incompetence, and the solution is to learn the science of attraction. The looksmaxer believes the problem is physical, and the solution is the cosmetic project of self-improvement. The hustlepreneur believes the problem is financial, and the solution is some combination of get-rich-quick schemes. The alt-right believes the problem is society's fault, and the solution is to inflict an equivalent loss of status on your enemies. All of these cross-pollinate, but each deserves its own examination. First, the PUAs. The thesis of pickup artistry is that most men fail with women because they're behaviorally untrained, and training, not genetics, is the variable within your control. Pickup artists were the bane of millennial feminism in the late aughts, but they were possibly the only ones in the manosphere whose self-improvement project actually required affection for another person, a woman no less. Pickup artistry offered a set of conversational strategies for men to use when romantically approaching women. Critics latched on to the evil of negging, a backhanded compliment deliberately designed to introduce mild self-doubt in the target, making her more receptive to the man delivering it. This was obviously manipulative, but critics tended to treat negging as representative of everything PUAs taught, which obscured the more mundane reality of most of the instruction. The PUA curriculum was largely a way of steering under-socialized men away from the impulse to nervously blurt out, "Hey, you're the most beautiful girl I've ever seen. Can I get your number now, please?" Which is technically complimentary, but functionally useless. This initiated versus uninitiated dynamic was what PUA's critics neglected. Books like The Game or Mystery Method were written for the men Jezebel writers knew from Brooklyn bars and literary readings. Everything from basic conversation to demonstrating romantic interest, all of the pickup strategies in these books describe things that socialized men do so intuitively they don't even realize they're doing it. The men these books were actually written for had no such practice. Maybe they weren't popular in high school. Maybe they never went to college, so they never spent years speaking with women in seminars for hours at a time. The less socialized you are, the more you need someone to spell it out step by step. To the already socialized, this kind of prescriptive strategizing looks sociopathic, but it's really just the ABCs for people still learning to read. The trouble with PUA gurus was that they attempted to rebut the formulaic, charted reality of the incel worldview by doubling down on its formulaicism, mapping attraction into a series of foolproof sentences and scripted interactions. The implicit promise was that flirtation could be mastered the same way you memorize a test. Learn the right lines in the right order and collect your result. But conversation is something that happens between two people who are both improvising in real time. A script can get you through the opening, but the moment it runs out, you're more exposed than if you never had one, because now you're pretending to be someone you're not. The PUA trainee who actually succeeded wasn't the one who memorized the most material. It was the one who kept showing up, talking to enough women that the script could eventually be forgotten. The PUA gurus were obviously douchey, but their practical instruction, go outside and talk to people, was the only advice in the manosphere that pointed men toward other human beings rather than away from them. And its absence is what separates the PUAs from the looksmaxers. The thesis of looksmaxing is that the world is governed by a hardwired attraction to beauty, in dating, in hiring, and basic social warmth, so you should do everything in your power to become more beautiful to ascend your position on the SMV chart.
What are you waiting for?
Looksmaxing embraces the core premise of both dating apps and the longhouse, that perception is the highest form of competence because it's the only metric available for comparison. As a solo activity, looksmaxing allows men to seek advice from one another online, compare results, and discuss physical self-improvement, ostensibly as a way of improving their chances with women, but primarily as a homosocial way for heterosexual men to digitally bond while cheering on one another's body dysphoria. In practice, looksmaxing functions less like dating prep and more like a support group where the support consists entirely of measuring each other's skulls. Jean Baudrillard had a word for what looksmaxing does to attraction: obscenity. Not in the sexually explicit sense, but as a way to describe an excess of rational clarity, a culture so fixated on quantifying and systematizing that mystery becomes intolerable. And so we get Canthal tilt scores, facial thirds ratios, jaw angle measurements. Attraction in this world isn't something you feel, it's something you calculate. The problem is that seduction, the thing looks-maxing is supposedly in service of, works precisely because it can't be calculated. It lives in the gap between what's said and what's left unsaid, between what's shown and what's withheld. The more precisely the looks-maxer maps his own attractiveness through forums and facial analysis apps, the more an actual in-person interaction with a woman becomes a threat rather than an opportunity. His SMV score exists in the diagram, but every woman exists outside of it. Nothing she could say or do in real life is likely to confirm what the chart already told him. If anything, she can only undo his hard work. This is how you end up with a practice ostensibly designed to attract women that ultimately necessitates avoiding them.
I don't take bitches for dinner. The only dinner a woman will ever go to with me is when I'm meeting other men, but like a one-on-one dinner with a girl is a mistake and a waste of fucking time and money.
3 hours of fucking garbage.
Let me tell you what a dinner with me and a woman looks like. Woman sits next to me, looks hot, the other men at the table respect that, and we talk about business and I genuinely ignore her the whole time.
Beyond its most deranged practices, looks-maxing overlaps with general men's fitness culture. Lifting weights, hiking, running, jujitsu, boxing, being outdoors, eating food that hasn't been processed into oblivion. That liberal media coded these healthy activities as dangerously conservative is its own kind of self-defeat and goes a long way toward explaining why there will never be a liberal Joe Rogan. Fitness critics' resentment is said to stem from the toxic male culture surrounding sports, but their anxiety really comes down to sport itself. Physical activities that reward objective standards of excellence through open competition are unsettling to a worldview built on the blank slate, the belief that the educated mind can always supersede the body. Fitness is a daily demonstration that this isn't true. It insists on demonstrable physical differences between men and women, on competitions where the mind and body must cooperate as equal partners rather than the body being a vessel the mind simply pilots to write blue sky posts. Ultimately, the liberal suspicion of physical excellence is that it justifies supremacy, but this is an opinion only someone who lives in fear of their own body could hold. To test your body's upper limits is always an exercise in humility because it shows you exactly where the road ends, and there's always someone who can go further. The real lesson of physical culture is to take pride in attempting something difficult rather than the result it produces. Those who take the physical accomplishments of their youth as a permanent measure of their worth are forcibly humbled by time, as age reclaims the gifts that were always only on loan. Through exercise, the body teaches humility without being asked, which is more than any HR inclusivity seminar has ever managed. Next up, the hustlepreneurs. The thesis of hustlepreneurship is that the economy is rigged against wage workers, so the best way to ascend the SMV chart is to stop selling your time to someone else and become your own boss. The problem is that wage workers without college degrees lack formal business knowledge, which makes them uniquely susceptible to self-empowerment plans that emphasize looking wealthy over any understanding of how to become it. This is why you'll never hear a hustlepreneur guru recommend a union apprenticeship.
I'm about 250. I do the power lines.
Power lines?
Yeah, contractor. If you want to work more, like I'm in management, the guys that are actually working right now every day, they're making close to 500. We had one guy last year make 499.
What are skills you need to have like to get into this field?
It's usually an apprenticeship, usually 3 to 5 years through the union. It's all on-the-job training. Or graduate, you're a journeyman lineman, and then you can travel the world.
The path to journeyman electrician takes 5 years of actual work, and actual work is precisely what hustlepreneurship is selling an escape from. Hustlepreneurship is a marriage between the avarice of con men and the naive desperation of their marks. It ensnares men so intensely dissatisfied with wage work that they won't spend 5 years building technical competency, even if it all but guarantees them an upper middle class life. They want out now, which makes them uniquely susceptible to pitches that flatter their impatience by suggesting that any time-intensive learning is for beta cucks who can't figure it out themselves. So what do you do if you have no training? Well, so long as you have a phone, you can become a commissioned recruiter for someone else's scheme. You can sell a course, a PDF, a virtual mentorship program by spamming everyone you know and total strangers. The door-to-door salesman used to have only so many doors to knock on, but the hustlepreneur has the entire internet at his disposal, and no one is more likely to buy the course than someone already seduced by the lifestyle it promises. This is why hustlepreneur culture becomes based on the ostentatious display of wealth as the most effective strategy to become wealthy, performing the role of male provider until enough people believe it that it becomes true. Perception becomes the highest form of competence because it's the only metric available for comparison. Hence the zealous obsession with the affect of being a businessman, of projecting macho intensity, of barking at an imagined client or underling.
Take your shirt off. Look at yourself. Dude, you gave up. You completely eat garbage. You don't take care of yourself. You're negative. You complain. Come on, man. You go and drink. Why? I can go dance. I don't need a drink. I need to stay elite. If you don't believe in you right now, I swear I will come through this camera. I will throw you through a freaking window.
The hustlepreneur's portrayal of a businessman always comes off like a male stripper in a cop uniform. His clothes are 2 sizes too small, and you can tell he's just itching to shed his costume. This desire to be Juilliard trained in the performance of masculinity is widespread among men who feel estranged from the honor culture of their forefathers. You see it in the proliferation of male-to-male conversion therapy camps, 5-figure week-long retreats where men pay to be screamed at, dunked in ice buckets, and beaten in the mud. What actually motivates them is a hunger for honor culture's defining feature, direct conflict, and the hope that a week of physical and verbal combat can backfill an entire adult life of HR-mediated passive aggression. That is, of course, unless they'd rather quit their office job and become their own boss by becoming a commissioned recruiter for the very camp they attended, selling the benefits of male-to-male conversion therapy for the next wave of dissatisfied office workers. And finally, we have the alt-right. The role of the alt-right within the manosphere was to take what was cosmically hopeless about the incel black pill and reframe it as politically constructed. Keep working on your looks, your game, your income, but now you have an explanation for why none of it's working, and a villain to hold responsible. You're not failing, you're being failed by your cultural enemies, which means you can pursue self-improvement and self-pity at the same time without either one contradicting the other. The alt-right's ideological promiscuity, hopping between race science, evolutionary psychology, Christianity, nationalism, monarchism, reflects no coherent worldview, only a consistent intent to restore status without ever mentioning class. Alt-right isn't even the term most of them would use today. It describes a chain of influence loose enough to include figures who'd be appalled to share a list together. To understand their grip, you have to understand how much of it was handed to them by 4chan and the Great Awakening in equal measure. The fact that a trad conservative movement could spawn from a message board whose culture revolved around hardcore pornography, drug use, transgenderism, parasocial fetishism, atheism, nihilism, and every other imaginable form of degeneracy often baffles critics. But the answer is right in front of them. For a decade, 4chan's users speed-ran the project of becoming yourself, engaged in relentless one-upsmanship of self-expression, finding every possible profane thing to do, say, or believe. They were genuinely searching for the limits of liberalism's invitation to abandon any fixed moral compass, and the result of this grand project of total indulgence was that it made them want to kill themselves. The Anons had already found the endgame of becoming yourself. fixate on your special interests, your chosen identities, your entertainment, your porn habits to the exclusion of everything else, and the result is becoming such a uniquely strange shut-in that existence itself starts to feel unbearable. Many early 4chan users who drifted toward the alt-right weren't rejecting liberalism from the outside. They were rejecting it from the inside, having followed it all the way to its logical conclusion and found nothing but misery and loneliness there. When you've followed the project of becoming yourself to the end and arrived at a noose in an empty room, the appeal of a prepackaged set of answers becomes obvious. Religion offers a fuller account of why existence matters. Tradition answers the questions you're too exhausted to answer yourself: how to live, what to believe, who to be, and who to do it with. And so you hear, stop watching porn, eat whole foods, start exercising, spend less time online, go to church, get married, have kids. All the standard alt-right talking points are simply the opposite of the degenerate lifestyle Anons had been living, with the crucial distinction that this advice doesn't come from a basement-dwelling peer, but from an authority figure, someone already successful and publicly credible, speaking on behalf of the greatest authority of all, God himself. But this internal reckoning among downwardly mobile millennial men coincided with a cultural awakening that had loudly decided that men like these were the root cause of everything wrong with America. For Gen Z men who spent their childhood immersed in over a decade of woke social media before ever entering college or the workforce, the situation was starker still. For a child, there was no refuge in the kayfabe of being one of the good ones because there was no career to advance, only a cultural consensus that had assigned him blame for American decline before he ever had a chance to participate in adult life. By stripping out class analysis, the Great Awakening cast younger and downwardly mobile men as privileged in ways that felt entirely detached from their reality as unemployed, suicidally lonely, or helplessly underage. A privilege lecture delivered by an Ivy League graduate with a national audience to someone sitting unemployed in their parents' basement.
I voted for Donald Trump. I voted for Trump because I thought he'd create a better America for everyone. But after reading 800 or so pages on queer feminist theory, I realize now just how much I've been duped. We were told Hillary Clinton was the enemy, but it's clear now that the true enemy is a patriarchal, capitalistic society that maintains its ascendance by making powerful and ambitious women appear threatening, only to protect my status in a system purposefully designed to benefit cishet white men like myself. Jesus.
In 2015, practically every institution was sympathetic to the awakening and hostile to men who didn't go to college, and the awakening's most powerful weapon was the accusation of racism, the one label that ended all arguments. To combat this, the alt-right began calling their opponents pedophiles, a kind of nuclear option designed to outflank the need to appeal to a third party. Its enduring strength comes from the fact that it's the only designation considered worse than being racist, which meant red-pilled men could go on the offensive without needing any institutional authority on their side. They finally had a viable tool to lower their enemy's status. To call a liberal a pedophile was to tap into a genuine fear that after the legalization of gay marriage and gender transition for minors, the next frontier of identity expansion would be the legal enshrinement of pedophilia.
We're coming for them. We're coming for your children. We're coming for them. We're coming for them. We're coming for your children. We're coming for them.
An undercurrent running through Pizzagate, QAnon, Hillary Clinton, John Podesta, Joe Biden, Jeffrey Epstein, Hollywood, Disney, drag queen story hours, trans athletes, and public school curriculum. Obviously, some of these accusations were more legitimate than others. Pizzagate was the first viral deployment of this tactic, a crowdsourced accusation that produced no evidence, only consequences. The pedophile hunter videos that now rack up millions of views on YouTube and TikTok are its logical successor. Men being ambushed after being lured into fake sex meetups with fake children, targeted for the greatest humiliation of their lives, with the sin kept lurid enough that the hunter's authority to judge and punish without a jury is never questioned.
You're not here to meet a 13-year-old girl?
No.
My bad, Josh. My bad, Josh. This boy's lying out his ass.
Excuse me, everybody!
Trying to pick up a little girl.
This man right here came to be the 13-year-old girl off the app with
You on the farm, right? So you used to rednecks. You used to rednecks.
In your city, this man right here came to get a 13-year-old girl.
We're gonna get all the evidence. All right?
I didn't come to meet
You understand?
nobody.
We're gonna get the evidence. I know where you work.
There's something at least marginally more honest about this format than the cancellation campaigns it mirrors. Pedophile hunters openly revel in their own crass entertainment value, where cancellations could never quite admit they were having fun without undermining their appeal for sympathy. No such restraint applies here. Secure in his moral authority, he gets to play with his food, forcing his targets to fight each other a la bum fights, to strip naked, to call their wives, to beg. This vigilante spectacle speaks to the unbridled joy the alt-right takes in owning its enemies, a sensibility Donald Trump's presidency formalized into a permission slip that read, "You don't have to be polite. You don't have to extend good faith to people who want you dead, and triggering your opponent is an end that always justifies the means." The permission to trigger created a tendency among the alt-right to hyperstitionally project reality, repeating the most offensive framing possible until it stops needing to be true. It began in the viral customs of anonymous shitposting, where a claim doesn't need to be factually accurate to be directionally useful. You say it for the lulz, then you say it again, and somewhere in the repetition, the ironic distance collapses. The Facebook boomers who encounter the messaging downstream receive it as literal truth. Eventually, the shitposters get high on their own supply, and everyone's earnestly repeating the same point about staged assassinations, or Jewish space lasers, or UFOs as demonic entities. To repeat this forbidden truth is to perform a theatrical exit from the longhouse, proof that you're no longer falsifying your preferences and free to say whatever you actually think.
There's got to be one real nigga. Can the real nigga please stand up? There has to be one real nigga left in America, in this damn country. Are there any real niggas left that aren't doing advertisements for gold and fucking pills? Are there any real niggas left that actually got censored and banned on YouTube? Where's the real niggas? And I'll die just to inspire another generation of them.
The more a talking point or source has been banned, mocked, or dismissed, the more authoritative it becomes. Unlike PMC virtue signaling, the credibility of alt-right vice signaling depends on the risk it carries. Losing a job opportunity, getting deplatformed, triggering mass outrage. The severity of the punishment determines how truthful it is. There's always pressure to escalate when vice signaling because the most offensive blasphemy reaches the largest audience and draws the most punishment, which, in this world, makes it the most true. But for much of that audience, vice signaling occupies a separate cognitive register from earnestly holding racist or prejudicial beliefs. The alt-right maintains a similar kayfabe relationship to its most radical talking points as wokeness does to its own. Less sincere beliefs than signals of social alignment, less about what you believe than who you're against. As Eric Kaufman notes, this holds true even for followers of Nick Fuentes, arguably the most ideologically serious figure the alt-right has produced. Few of his regular followers are white nationalists. Only 13% say immigration should be cut to zero. Just 1 in 5 say you have to have an American accent or be white to be a true American. Almost a quarter say a non-English speaking America would be no less American than today. They rate Black Americans a relatively positive 57 out of 100 on a feelings thermometer. 1 in 3 groypers are minorities, and a similar share are women. Half of those who openly identified as racist also endorsed affirmative action, while among those who called themselves anti-Semites, more said white people are favored in society than said Jews are. For even the groypers, Fuentes is beloved for what his speech does to their enemies, not as a description of reality.
Hitler was cool and awesome.
It's like, obviously what Hitler did isn't cool and awesome. It's like, they're saying he was all dressed up in his stuff and he had his army. And he's like, it was cool, like, as a person who likes history, seeing a leader, he compared it to like a villain in a movie.
We get it. I mean, it's inflammatory, but if you understand what he's saying, most of his jokes...
I'm just at the point where people don't ever get criticized for actually doing stuff that hurts our country. So, like, if someone makes a joke, he's not even in political office, it shouldn't matter that much. Even if he's wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, let's compare. Look at what Trump's doing in Iran right now.
American
We're
blood
talking
is on
about someone
Trump's
joking
hands.
about the Holocaust. It's like school kids joke about the Holocaust.
Yeah.
The Kaufman data explains what would otherwise seem like a paradox, a so-called white nationalist movement led by a man with a Mexican name, whose most viral moment of 2026 features a group singing Hail Hitler that includes a Mexican, a chemically castrated eunuch, a Filipino gay porn model, a Sudanese man, and a biracial Muslim. In typical American decadence, even our Nazis are intersectional. The alt-right audience's own performative inconsistencies make them comfortable overlooking the fact that practically all of their leaders are proud charlatans. Anti-porn conservatives pimping out OnlyFans models for 80% of their earnings, inveighing against degeneracy while taking gambling sponsorships, lambasting Jewish financiers while selling their own followers scam coins and fake investment groups. Unlike the liberal who has to pretend they're doing good while making a living, the alt-right influencer makes no pretense about his avarice because every criticism of him is taken as evidence of his authenticity. It's a kind of honor among thieves where getting the bag always justifies the means, so long as the right people are upset about it. Chapter 6. Consolation Vices for FanDuel Americans. There's a much larger population of men whose response to the awakening of the 2010s and 20s wasn't to mirror its anger, but to disengage from the culture war entirely. Neither woke nor red-pilled, they've simply opted out. These are what Scott Greer calls FanDuel Americans, men who don't want to dismantle multicultural America or celebrate it. They just want to live in it cheaply, watch the game, and be left alone. The average working-class FanDuel American would rather watch Hawk Tuah or mall prank videos than sit through Dave Portnoy's lectures about Israel, which is why Barstool Conservative, Matthew Walther's term, undersells how thoroughly apolitical they are. Max Reed's term, the Zinternet, gets closer.
I'm just gonna sit here and gamble all day, bitch. Yeah, try to kick me out. I beg of you, please, I need to hit this. Yeah! I fucking knew it!
FanDuel Americans are a disappointment to right-wingers who refer to them as the raped, or goy cattle, for their uncritical consumption of sports, entertainment, and recreational drugs.
Let's have some goy slop. Goy slop is highly processed foods like McDonald's, KFC, Dairy Queen. Foods that are designed to make you lazy, weak, and infertile. Goy slop fails your stomach, but leeches your energy instead of giving you good nutritional value like regular food. Didn't I mention it's addictive too? Be a good goy and eat your goy slop.
Beyond loyalty to their favorite sports team, they're primarily interested in short-term gratification, which makes conservatives' existential commitments to God, country, and family pale in comparison to this weekend's parlay or their next dab hit. FanDuel Americans are immune to the racial animus of the culture war because they gamble on a diverse coalition of players, and racial solidarity feels like betting against your own parlay. The only group FanDuel Americans disappoint more are the woke, who frequently mistake their love for American flags and country music as a pronouncement of strict conservative values they couldn't care less about. FanDuel Americans are equally indifferent to checking their white privilege or protesting for racial justice. Wokeness presents its own existential commitments, and those are ultimately just another hindrance to fun. A generous reading of the FanDuel American would say they've achieved a kind of Zen state, indifferent to any ideology that would burden them with the past or the future. But their relentless pursuit of stimulation suggests the opposite, that boredom is their ultimate enemy, and the present moment, unmediated by distraction, is the thing they fear the most. To the extent they vote at all, FanDuel Americans are the consummate low-information swing voters, which is why politicians, Donald Trump especially, have made inroads with them by appearing on the kinds of streams and shows they consume in 60-second clip form. As material conditions worsen, woke or based political rhetoric has increasingly lost its power to convince or pacify. You can blame the heckin' white cishet patriarchy or all the troons in women's sports for unaffordable housing, groceries, and medicine, but it's becoming harder to ignore the real culprits. Politicians can't acknowledge their donors as being responsible for decline, so their only remaining option is to console an increasingly angry and skeptical public by legalizing the naughty activities the government formerly prevented, to become the fun parent, the authority figure who lets you do whatever you want. This is a dream come true for FanDuel Americans. Across party lines, policymaking has drifted toward a libertarian consensus. drugs legalized, gambling normalized, porn made universally acceptable, usury and speculation of every variety openly encouraged. These are consolation vices, cheap substitutes for the housing, healthcare, and economic security that would actually change the material conditions of people's lives. The bipartisan message of consolation vices is the same. You are free to live however you want. The same state granting new freedoms is also withdrawing from any responsibility to improve or stabilize your life. Infrastructure crumbles, public safety becomes privatized, no new institutions are built, and failing ones aren't repaired. What's marketed as added freedom is simply the state abandoning the social contract, offering unlimited indulgence as a consolation prize. You won't get healthcare, but you will have weed on every corner and kratom at the gas station. Funding for schools and childcare will be cut, but you can watch people practicing making babies while riding the subway. There won't be a jobs program or social security, but you will have the chance to strike it rich through a 13-leg parlay on DraftKings. The only real promise left is this: we won't judge your bad habits while you all fend for yourselves. This is a brilliant deadbeat strategy because it solves two problems at once, answering voters' questions of how are you going to help me and why are things getting worse with the same move. We're helping by giving you unrestrained freedom over your own choices. And why are things deteriorating, you might ask? Well, look around. It's because too many people are making bad choices with all that freedom. The policy explains the decline, and the decline justifies the policy. Those same policies have since produced a backlash against the men they were meant to console. Most people still resent having excess thrown in their faces and believe there should be limits on vice, even if they can't personally draw the line. So when someone walks their kid through a cloud of weed smoke in a public playground or rides the subway behind a man publicly masturbating in a cum-stained t-shirt, they don't see someone abandoned by institutions. They see a loser who failed to govern himself.
Hey there. Do you see this says? It says school zone. School zone. That right there is a school. School's in session. Doing drugs right here in a school zone is going to get you a felony. You guys got 2 minutes, and then I'm calling Bike Squad. They're on speed dial. Yep.
This is how the men who most eagerly accept the offer of legalized indulgence lose public sympathy the moment they too aggressively take advantage of it. But because it's unacceptable to criticize the most visible victim groups engaged in vice, public frustration gets redirected elsewhere. The FanDuel American ends up serving as a scapegoat for all the negatives these vices have produced, a safe target for complaints about Americans who barely work, use drugs, and masturbate all day without anyone having to risk being accused of prejudice. Many of the vice-fueled habits that define the FanDuel American were universally encouraged until the wrong people started adopting them. That laziness was resistance to the Protestant work ethic, that being fat is healthy at every size, that staying home was a civic virtue, that drug use was self-medication, that unlimited porn access was a human right. But as those same behaviors were adopted by those who fell outside the taxonomy of recognized victims, they were recast as evidence of a uniquely young male dysfunction. Same vices, safer target. The FanDuel American mostly indulges in private. It's the people you step over on your way to work who bear the public face of consolation vice culture, and their visibility is no accident.
My job was to intake homeless individuals on the street.
I don't have to be on the streets. I just choose to be.
You just choose to be?
A lot of people are out here because they want to be out here.
Everyone's usually has a serious drug problem.
They kind of quit society.
This right now is literally by choice.
Did you get the sense that Pat cared whether they were on drugs?
No, and I'm not trying to be like crazy with it, but definitely not.
I mean, if we're gonna be realistic, they pay you to be homeless here.
They make it so easy and normalize it.
Drug dealers are just being let go over and over and over.
It's like the cops are, it's like they're your neighbor, you know?
They enable them because they allow the open air drug market.
Open street dealing like that, with the cops just across the street, like, watching them.
I think they've given up on the people that are out there on the street.
I've never seen anything like it, and I've been in the game for fucking 30 years, dude. Never seen anything like it.
Take the decriminalization of hard drugs. Needle exchanges are subsidized, but the psychiatric and rehabilitation institutions necessary to treat addiction are not. Conservatives relish the predictable damage this decriminalization causes in big cities they resent, while liberals insist that institutionalizing people in the grip of overdoses or drug-induced psychosis would be crueler than walking past their convulsing bodies. These opposing interpretations arrive at the same austere outcome, a society where public self-destruction is tolerated because one faction views it as humane and the other views it as deserved. Though often justified through the language of freedom or empathy, the constant public display of homelessness, addiction, sickness, and mental breakdown serves another function. Many of these conditions could be reduced through public investment, yet they remain highly visible on purpose. Their presence operates as a warning. This is what your future could look like if you don't accept whatever work is available. And any job, however bad, looks tolerable by comparison. This visible neglect is closer to a show of force than a gesture of care. This is why the wealthiest American cities are especially sure to keep such unchecked dysfunction on display. The people who suffer through this visible dysfunction are permitted to live under an entirely separate set of legal expectations from the average citizen, because removing them from public life would eliminate their function as scarecrows for austerity, people whose visible misery intimidates everyone else into labor compliance. Rehabilitate them, and they can no longer serve as the rock bottom everyone else lives in fear of becoming. To avoid this brutal fate, hard work is supposed to offer a path to the American dream. But by now, everyone knows capital outpaces the value of labor, that someone who buys GameStop stock can earn more in minutes than someone working at an actual GameStop store can in months. The average young man doesn't have to be an economist to understand wage work as a dead-end necessity rather than a path to upward mobility, which explains the appeal of gambling, scamming, or both. This outlook is reinforced from the top down by elected officials who flaunt their insider trading without guilt. Everywhere we look, we're taught hard work is for suckers. The other problem with the American dream is that social media has revealed that practically every person who's reached the top of it is now seen as a cautionary tale rather than an aspirational figure, an Epstein-adjacent pedophile rather than John Galt. Their romantic relationships are universally fraught. Incapable of maintaining the genuine affection of a woman, these men pay women off for their temporary loyalty and clinical access to their wombs before it's eventually discovered that all the money in the world can't make a life with them livable. So many of these men appear sickly, distended, frail, or otherwise physically grotesque. A surprising number publicly suffer from crippling drug addictions, not unlike the homeless men thought to be their opposite.
You know, I should not need to remind you that in the in the sort of quasi-mythological New Testament account, the slogan of the Antichrist is peace and safety, and that there is we're told that there's nothing worse than Armageddon, but perhaps there is. Perhaps we should fear the Antichrist. Perhaps we should fear the one world totalitarian state more than Armageddon.
Their AGI-coveting techno-misanthropic beliefs likely originate from the hatred they feel toward their own bodies, a desire to transcend into a more ethereal form that doesn't require wearing a t-shirt in the pool. Despite their wealth hoarding, few of these men are actually fat, which would imply a robust love of food, a source of genuine pleasure that seems to escape practically all of them. Food is an extension of taste, which is an extension of one's relationship to culture, of which these men proudly have none. As Joyce Carol Oates observed of Elon Musk, he never posts anything suggesting he enjoys what virtually everyone appreciates. Scenes from nature, a pet, praise for a film or book, pride in a friend's accomplishments, condolences for someone who's died, or pleasure in sports. He seems totally uneducated and uncultured, and the poorest person on Twitter may have more access to beauty and meaning than the world's wealthiest man.
This is the chainsaw for bureaucracy.
Sensing that even a cursory engagement with art or literature would amount to a scolding of their sins, they instead declare that true strength comes from knowing nothing about yourself or those around you.
You don't have any levels of introspection.
Yes, zero. As little as possible.
Why?
Move forward. Go.
Yeah, I don't know. I found people who dwell on the past get stuck in the past. It's a real problem, and it's a problem at work, and it's a problem at home.
Some hire court jester ideologues to spin theories of their power's inevitability or benevolence, while the rest of the world just laughs at how fake and gay the whole charade appears. For everyone else witnessing this, not wanting to be homeless, but convinced that upward mobility through hard work is impossible and perhaps not even as desirable as advertised, there's a third path. Checking out entirely, retreating into short-term private comforts and thrills, becoming, in other words, a FanDuel American. Young men dominate the overlapping circles of basement living, FanDuel Americanism, and consolation vice use. The majority of Americans between 19 and 29 have already resigned themselves to living with their parents indefinitely. Consolation vices satisfy the testosterone-fueled drive for risk that would, in a healthier society, propel them out of their parents' house and into a life of their own. Offer unlimited access to escape to people with nothing to lose and nowhere to go, and they'll take it every time. From one gas station pill to the next parlay, you can lose it all or strike it rich, but you can never leave the address you grew up in. Chapter 7. The OnlyFans subscriber versus the gooner. Of all the consolation vices on offer, none produces more cognitive dissonance than the sexual ones. Liberal culture believes in sex positivity, that sex work is real work, that slut-shaming is a sin, that masturbation is self-care, and that liberation means abolishing all sexual shame, while simultaneously insisting that the men who consume and finance this ecosystem are porn-sick losers, basement-dwelling incels, emotionally stunted addicts whose horniness itself is a pathology. Love the sin, hate the sinner. Spicy content creators are also shamed, often by their own subscribers. The exact type of man who can't help but call complete strangers ran through high body count roasties in comment sections is most often the type paying OnlyFans subscription fees. Those who are one of the good ones become especially hesitant to criticize OnlyFans for fear of sounding like him.
Stop talking shit about women who make corn. Okay? Stop talking shit about women who work in that industry because, for one, women see you do that and they respect you less. They want to be with you less, right? And for two, these are some of the most intelligent, business savvy, and socially conscious people that I've ever personally met in my life. Genuinely.
This leaves a little room to ask how we ended up in a world where 1.4 million American women ages 18 to 40 now create OnlyFans porn, of which men spent roughly $5 billion last year, let alone whether any of this reflects a healthy society. The silence creates a strange double standard. A 25-year-old woman in a consensual relationship with a man 10 years older is often described as a de facto victim of exploitation through lurid accusations of grooming and power dynamics. Yet, there's far less scrutiny of the widespread pressures encouraging millions of young women to sell sexual content online the moment they turn 18, some of whom are still in high school. If age gap discourse loudly exaggerates harm, OnlyFans discourse quietly insists there's none to be found, avoiding the fact that it's male desire creating and benefiting from it at the top, in favor of emphasizing the financial benefits women receive. The common defense, it's misogynist to believe that selling your body on OnlyFans is any different from selling your body in a coal mine, accidentally gives the game away. The analogy only makes sense if both jobs carry real risks of harming the worker. Even defenders are tacitly admitting that turning yourself into a porn commodity has costs, psychological, reputational, medical, even if saying so out loud is socially discouraged. These costs might be worth it if the financial rewards were as advertised, but they aren't.
So when right go wrong, just say a little prayer, get your money, man, life goes on. Let's go. Yes, I am hopeful for today. Take this music and use it. Let it take you away and be hopeful.
OnlyFans is widely sold as a shortcut to fast money. The platform has carefully cultivated the image that massive earnings are available to anyone bold enough to join, routinely spotlighting a handful of celebrity success stories.
If you're over the age of 25 and you're still working a 9 to 5, you are a failure. Like, by then you should have already made your bag. And ladies, every single one of you should drop the link like me. Like, just literally just make your bag. Who gives a f what anybody thinks? Screw your family. My family kicked me out. I got disowned. They don't talk to me anymore. They don't f me. But who gives a shit? I can literally buy their whole life if I wanted to. I'm good. Also, f education, because Harvard was never going to help me make 8 figures. That's why I dropped out of it, and I dropped the link instead.
In reality, the top 0.1% of creators capture 76% of all income, while 90% of OnlyFans creators make just $126 per month on average. Framed as a guaranteed windfall, this pitch appeals most to downwardly mobile women, desperate for money and unbothered by the prospect of a permanently public porn archive. Even college-educated women repeat the joke, "At least I can always start an OnlyFans," as if the platform were an alternate life of luxury they're reluctantly choosing to forgo for now. The myth of the huge OnlyFans payday is kept alive by a minuscule group of women who already had large audiences before joining, often after years of posting suggestive content and building anticipation. Starting an OnlyFans is less like building a small business piece by piece and more like launching a meme coin or NFT project, complete with the soft Ponzi scheme dynamics. The biggest returns go to celebrities and insiders already well positioned in the lewd's attention economy. This is why low-B newcomers to the platform aren't really selling content to subscribers so much as they're selling the idea of starting an OnlyFans to other young women. Their participation sustains the illusion of widespread opportunity while funneling money and visibility upward to the platform's biggest earners and ultimately the platform itself. Even if these low-Bs generate little revenue themselves, OnlyFans benefits from their presence because it normalizes the idea that selling sex is always empowering, even as the average monthly return on their labor is 10 times less than the federal minimum wage. The extent to which people are free to make decisions about their own bodies depends on the alternatives available to them. When the government allows high schoolers to profit from sexual content online, it takes on a parallel responsibility to ensure that this isn't the most readily available job opportunity in front of them. Otherwise, what appears to be freedom of choice begins to operate more like indirect encouragement to get naked on camera the moment you turn 18.
So when did you first discover me?
Right after I got my computer.
So how many years ago was that?
Oh, jeez, I don't know. It's got to be at least 6 years old.
All right. Well.
If the rewards of joining OnlyFans are often exaggerated, the downsides are just as often minimized. That attitude grew out of the 2010s when office workers were encouraged to bring their whole selves to work. At the same moment, social media platforms urged everyone to share what was on their mind. Together, these parallel pressures taught people to treat oversharing as proof of authenticity, whether to an employer or to an audience. By inviting employees to foreground their personalities through fashion, sexuality, and lifestyle, companies could reframe overwork as yet another self-expressive opportunity to become themselves. Social media worked the same way. Confessional stories about trauma, breakups, call-outs, and identity crises algorithmically rewarded as courageous acts of authenticity. When strangers on social media offer more validation than your immediate friend circle ever could, the platform begins to feel like somewhere you never need to leave either. People absorbed these market incentives so completely they mistook them for their own personal convictions. Honesty no longer meant being truthful when asked, but preemptively volunteering the most intimate details of your life as proof of transparency. Once you've spent years publicly narrating your most intimate thoughts and experiences, you're forced to ask, is a lifelong archive of posts about your politics, sexual preferences, and personal conflicts really any less likely to cost you a job than a folder of nudes? At that point, monetizing porn feels less like a risk and more like a continuation of a life already structured around proudly eroding your own privacy for a shot at upward mobility. This culture of oversharing was rarely as therapeutic as its advocates claimed. Rather than helping people build or repair their lives, it rewarded escalating conflict and self-degradation as content. Over time, many content creators lost the ability to distinguish between self-harm and self-improvement because the same audience pushing them toward greater extremes was the same one paying their bills. All the men inexplicably spending $5 billion on nudes in a world saturated with freely available porn are a separate puzzle.
Introduce yourself.
Well, I'm Big Tony. I am your #1 OF subscriber.
And how much have you spent?
$35K, $35,000.
Well, it's nice to finally meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Oh, you have soft hands.
Thanks.
Finally got to touch them.
Unlike videos of strangers, OnlyFans offers something porn can't: the experience of being known by the person you're watching. The voyeuristic thrill comes not just from seeing a nude, but from communicating with an amateur porn creator you could plausibly know. A parasocial bestie who speaks directly into her camera every day, building the impression of a relationship that exists just outside your reach. The pitch is always some version of the same thing. We can chat every day. Who knows where this will take us? Chatting with fans and building a rapport to upsell exclusive content accounts for over 70% of successful creators' revenues, and it's what structurally separates OnlyFans from all other internet porn. Unlike the Gooners, most OnlyFans subscribers aren't driven by hardcore extremity, but by proximity, the thrill of experiencing intimacy with someone who feels familiar through what's known as the girlfriend experience. And like most conversations with a girlfriend, much of this paid private conversation isn't sexually explicit at all. It's about ordinary topics like pets, politics, or sports. It amounts to men paying hundreds of dollars a month for daily check-ins and attention. The girlfriend experience runs into a basic structural problem. A small slice of top accounts captures most of the spending on the platform, and those creators receive more messages in a day than they could answer in a week. So the experience is outsourced to professional chatters who impersonate the creators. Workers often based in the Philippines, Pakistan, and India reported to work 12-hour shifts 6 days a week for about $3 an hour, a layer that is itself now being automated and replaced by AI agents trained on the creator's own style of communication. For those paying under the assumption of direct access to the woman featured in the content and not an Indian man in a call center or an AI agent, the discovery is a betrayal of the trust that made them willing to pay in the first place.
Also, do you feel like you're like ripping men off, like lying to them, deceitful? I mean, I guess it's their fault they're paying, but don't you feel a little bit shameful for that?
How am I ripping them off?
I'm not saying you are, I just know every big creator I know, they don't do they either have AI or someone else do it, so it's not even like really talking to the person.
I think guys kind of know that, like they know like Amaranth and these big Twitch streamers probably aren't messaging like tens of thousands of people, but they still log on, and I think the reason is because guys want to pretend. That's why guys now, there's a huge market for AI girlfriends. They're not going on thinking like this is actually Kendall Jenner talking to me, and yet they're still designing like a sim essentially of Kendall Jenner because they want that image with the fake experience. I saw this episode of Dr. Phil where this man is getting conned by this con artist who's using an image of a 25-year-old woman. Dr. Phil brings on the actual 25-year-old woman to confront the man to say, I am not the one speaking to you. The man goes home and continues to talk to this con artist because he's just so lonely, and he's built such a rapport with the con artist. He doesn't know what their face is, what their age is, what their race is, anything, but he continues to talk to them. So I think we're acting like men are so naive to the fact that they're being conned or that they're not talking to the actual person, while also avoiding the fact that like men are very eager to be in those types of conversations. They want to suspend their disbelief. Same way again they have AI girlfriends. Same way again they have flashlights, and like they have the most intricate themselves. They want something that resembles closely a woman so they can pretend it's a woman, and having that pretense is more important to them than the sincerity of it.
But the worst problem for OnlyFans creators is the possibility that the subscriber learns to stop caring about who or what he's talking to. Because once he adopts that outlook, the entire OnlyFans platform becomes incentivized to automate everything. Not just the chats, but the creators, the feeder social media accounts, the nudes, the custom videos, all of it. Why pay creators 80% when you could take 100%? The OnlyFans subscriber is still chasing something. Recognition, the simulation of being known by someone beautiful. The gooner has given up on even that. To be a gooner is to have a humiliation kink built around an all-consuming fixation on pornography, one actively opposed to sex or companionship with another person. Gooners are turned on by porn, but also by the thought of themselves consuming it, by the idea of being an addict. The aim is to reach a zen-like state through continual edging that can last hours or even days, not necessarily finishing, always consuming more, half stimulated, searching for the next better clip. It's the journey, not the destination, the process of surrendering your subjectivity to the infinite scroll, of becoming one with the platform. Gooner PMV compilations make this explicit. They're porn about watching porn, a recursive loop in which the viewer watches a proxy of himself degrade himself on screen, commanding him to sink ever deeper. It's similar to sitting at your laptop watching a streamer sit at their laptop, or scrolling as an algorithm reflects your preferences back in increasingly precise form, except where where most people eventually develop self-loathing for wasting their time doom scrolling, the gooner folds that self-loathing into the kink. This is why it's a misconception that gooners are just slack-jawed mouth breathers, numbed by porn sickness to the point of being oblivious to how they're perceived. They're highly self-aware of the fact that what they're doing is widely regarded as disgusting. That's what gets them off. They are vice signaling as a sexuality. Their behavior is a way of turning antisocial withdrawal into a retaliatory statement against the world, another beta uprising fantasy. This is why criticizing them on their own terms, calling them losers, incels, failures, doesn't really land. It just reinforces the posture they've already adopted, feeding into the defiant, joker-fied rejection of a society they so badly want to be excluded from. This willful self-destruction is largely a way of claiming control over the all-pervasive anxiety they describe having around in-person interactions with women. To be a gooner is to insist there's no point in trying to be with a woman because they found a sexuality more pure and more direct than dealing with the uncomfortable variables of sex with another person. Conveniently, this means no woman can ever reject them because they've already rejected every woman outright. Interactions with other men are a different matter. In what's called wank battling, two gooners competitively send each other porn they rate for quality, with the objective of learning the receiving gooner's interests well enough to eventually get him to come, a social sex drive redirected into structured homosocial interaction to avoid the anxiety that comes with women.
Naturals, go! Lucy Wilde, Sophia Mudd, Hitomi Tanaka, Ava Adams, Autumn Falls, Skylar Box, Kendra Sullivan, Val Myers, Lauren Phillips, Innocent Kate, Tessa Fowler, Gabby Carter, Lena Paul, Sophia Gomez. Yes, bro! Yes! Oh my gosh! Let's go, bro! You don't get these honors by being an edger. You do not get these kinds of honors by being an edger. You get these honors by being a fucking gooner. Let's go, man! Yes! I'm the best gooner alive! Yes!
At the extreme end, the gooner's pornosexuality leads him into days-long masturbation sessions across multi-screen goon caves designed for limitless viewing and sensory overload. Critics call this addiction, framing porn as the cause of the isolation and depression surrounding it. But the order is backwards. Men turn to those habits because they're already depressed, and porn is one of its outlets rather than its cause. To paraphrase Deep Left, depression can be understood as a defense mechanism against social alienation, a way of trying to realign with the group. People become depressed when they feel they no longer belong, something that in evolutionary terms resembles being pushed out of the tribe. Depression lowers status and ambition into a more passive, childlike posture, learned helplessness as a bid for reacceptance. But consolation vices block this process entirely, allowing men to remain isolated while performing their despair alone online, scrolling alone, smoking alone, gooning alone, so the pressure to socially reintegrate never builds. Addiction to video games, social media, and porn are better understood as variations of the same adaptive response. When life feels unrewarding, digital immersion becomes the most tolerable use of available time. These habits persist until something more meaningful replaces them, until upward mobility feels plausible again. For some, it never does. This is what makes the purely transactional bond between the men and women who've adopted porn as their life purpose so tragic. The woman concludes that what a man provides is financial support and nothing more. The man concludes that what a woman provides is sex and nothing more. Both are right about the transaction, both are wrong about each other. Chapter 8. Ending the war. The moment men and women were freed to become themselves looked like a slate of old gender roles being wiped clean. But it wasn't. The entire project conflated two very different ideas. Political equality between the sexes, meaning men and women deserve equal rights, protections, and opportunities, and biological sameness, meaning men and women are essentially identical, with no meaningful, observable, or testable differences between them. Most people agreed with the first. Very few, outside the most sunlight-deprived corners of academia, could argue the second with a straight face. Nonetheless, the two were packaged together, and anyone who tried to separate them was assumed to be attacking the first in order to gut it. Politically, men and women are mostly equals before the law, but culturally, people still hold fairly consistent understandings of masculinity and femininity, and however unfashionable those expectations became, they remained the basis of what men and women romantically wanted from each other.
I'm looking for a man in finance, trust fund, 6'5", blue eyes, finance, trust fund, 6'5",
The gap between the political and the personal was never resolved, just ignored. To admit that men and women were different in ways that mattered would seem to undermine the case for their equal treatment. To insist they were identical would require ignoring what everyone already knew from lived experience. The gender role solution that culture arrived at wasn't that men and women could become anything they want. It was that men and women must both become everything. Rather than wiping the slate clean, the supposed end of gender roles kept all the old parts and expanded the list of what was written on it. Men were still expected to be breadwinners and also become emotionally available, therapeutically self-aware, an equally involved parent, a dutiful homemaker, assertive but never aggressive. Women were still expected to be nurturing mothers and also become professionally ambitious, financially self-sufficient, sexually liberated but emotionally unneedy, assertive at work but warm at home, thin but not trying. The old roles weren't abolished, they were doubled. 2 full sets of expectations to be completed in the same amount of time using the same human capacity with half the margin for error. These aggressively expanded expectations are most visible on social media, usually not in what's celebrated as the ideal man or woman, but in what's fair game to mock as a failure of one. If you're a man, there are 2 things you can never be: broke or toxic. So you must be a breadwinner and one of the good ones. If you're a woman, there are 2 things you can never be: a lonely cat lady or a pick-me. So you must be a devoted mother and financially independent. What men and women expect from each other is always easier to mock than to embody, because what they both expect is practically impossible.
I'm looking for a man in finance with trust fund. 6'5", blue eyes.
Hi, I looked up the stats. I did the math. That's the number. Good luck.
The sense of impossibility is most acutely felt by the PMC, who've staked the most on meeting expectations, and who've made a content genre of cataloging their 18-hour day. Waking up, making food, commuting to the office, working, squeezing in a quick workout, commuting home, cooking, collapsing on the couch, and then asking desperately how anyone is supposed to also raise children, maintain friendships, go on dates, or nurture any interest outside of work's gravitational pull.
Be 6 foot, have a 6-pack, 200 pounds, get jacked, no chicken legs. Don't go bald, low back pain, mobility, hybrid athlete, high rocks, marathon, ultra marathon, make money, lots of money, provide, mortgage, tithing, taxes, save up, buy the truck, buy the mom car, car brakes, car insurance, life insurance, home insurance, mortgage, have a nice yard, sprinklers, peptides, creatine, more creatine, protein, more protein, testosterone, TRT, steroids, pre-workout, less pre-workout, no energy drinks, no soda, no sugar, AI, Claude, ChatGPT, all jobs gone in 5 years, thirst traps, porn everywhere, wandering eyes, podcasts, audiobooks, Joe Rogan, post on social, lock in, start a business, exit, 50 million, never work again, real estate, S&P 500, Bitcoin, crypto. Don't be soft, don't be a bitch, wake up early, go to bed early, no doom scroll, track everything, Whoop, Aura, Garmin, optimize, grow up, no one's coming to save you. Be a good hubby, date nights, plan everything, don't forget any dates.
The reason for their frustration is that it's impossible, not because people are failing to optimize hard enough, but because the conditions that would make it possible have been deliberately withdrawn. Subsidized childcare, affordable housing, functional public transit, accessible third spaces. The infrastructure that once distributed the burden of daily life across the collective has been replaced by the expectation that each individual carry it alone. And if you're frustrated by its absence, well, here's some weed or porn or kratom to tide you over in the meantime. So long as this is the case, your financial, health, and social responsibilities can only thrive at the expense of one another. Optimization in one area is always paid for by neglect in another. This inability to do everything well simultaneously is the practical basis of romantic companionship. Finding someone whose strengths cover your weaknesses and whose weaknesses you can cover in return. These day-in-the-life videos expressing frustration at the impossibility of doing everything alone are, in their desperation, recreating the concept of husbands and wives from first principles. Many women are genuinely free to lead a life without male dependence, but if the goal is to reach the upper class rather than simply maintain your current position, the two most reliable paths still run through male-controlled institutions. Climbing a corporate ladder where men still hold most senior positions, or partnering with a man who's already climbed it. Among adults 18 to 29, about 63% of men report being single, while only 34% of women say the same. The gap is explained by two overlapping dynamics. Young women disproportionately date older men, and a smaller number of high-status men dating multiple women simultaneously, leaving a larger share of their male peers with no one. Both men and women agree the gap exists, and both respond with the same conviction. I deserve more. Each has come to view relationships as a transactional opportunity to reclaim the status they've been kept from. As Isaac Barris-Fidner notes, incel anger and savage feminism aren't opposing forces, but two sides of the same coin. The savage feminist believes she deserves more than her available male peers. The incel believes he deserves more than the absence of women willing to date him. Young men and women who share the same economic precarity and same uncertain future end up at each other's throats over a sexual market neither of them designed. Savage feminism is what you get when the language of feminist empowerment gets captured by the interests of wealthy older men. It works by splitting masculinity in two. The established, financially comfortable man above, coded as protective and desirable. The young, broke man below, coded as toxic and disposable. Economic inequality becomes a dating preference, and class contempt becomes self-respect.
Look, if you're a woman, especially under the age of 35, relationships and love should be easy. If you do not already have kids with a man, and you don't have a mortgage and a house, it should be easy. He should be making your life easier. He should be making your life better.
Through savage feminist discourse, the young woman is always pointed upward toward the provider class and encouraged to disdain the men of her own generation as beneath her standards. She feels powerful because she's the one doing the choosing, but what she's really doing is auditioning. The final selection belongs to the men above. This is what makes all men are trash and my man is different perfectly compatible statements. The general category gets contaminated while the man above gets exempted, preserving access to his resources without surrendering the appearance of rejecting male power. This prized man goes by different names depending on who's posting. In conservative family language, he's the real man who provides for the household. In therapy language, he's the one who holds space without needing to be held up. In secular social media language, he's the invisible patron who grants access to the coveted soft life. In career woman language, he's the one whose income makes her ambition feel like a choice rather than a necessity. Across culture, the language changes, but the object of desire remains the same. The economic hierarchy of these relationships gets softened through words like care, maturity, generosity, and security, the same language that fills Tinder profiles seeking high-income men through terms like provider mindset, gifts, and financial assistance. The slogan of savage feminism is know your worth, then add tax. This language of empowerment is an intellectual justification for treating romantic partnership as a vehicle for upward class mobility. The rhetoric isn't built around finding an equal, but around finding someone who already occupies the class position you intend to reach. It's not that you're dating up, it's that you're dating across from where you plan to be someday. For lean-in feminism, the path forward means hardening yourself to the standards of male competition, negotiating aggressively, claiming visibility, taking the seat of power that's available to you. For savage feminism, it means hardening yourself to the standards of male sexuality, suppressing emotional attachment, embracing transactionalism, accepting your role as one of many options on someone's roster. This hardening process is itself what produces the grievance it claims to respond to. The sexual liberation that hookup culture promised delivered something closer to disposability. For many women, the accumulated pain of being repeatedly ghosted and discarded in situationship after situationship produces a generalized hatred of men, even when those men were acting within the callous terms hookup culture explicitly encouraged. The resulting all men are trash posting is itself part of the audition, a public demonstration of high standards designed to attract the men she's actually after and filter out any brokies who take it personally. The incel who takes the bait and loudly rages that he had nothing to do with her breakup only proves the point, announcing to no one who asked that he was neither the perpetrator nor of romantic interest. The frustration at being passed over is understandable. What's harder to understand is what he's supposed to do with it. The incel meme of state-mandated GFs is mostly a revenge fantasy about forcing women into sex against their will, but accidentally touches on something real. Romantic partnership has always been a primary vehicle for class mobility, which means a government that ships away decent-paying muscle power jobs, offers a binary choice between college debt and a lifetime of low-wage service work, allows the cost of housing to double in real terms, and legalizes every vice that numbs the pain of having no future, has delivered a clear message. You're on your own. The old ideal of reproducing functioning society through a family wage has been abandoned, leaving a permanent surplus of men the system has no use for and no interest in helping. The delusion of incel culture is expecting the rewards of effort through the strategy of surrender. You're not going to body count discourse your way back to agrarian patriarchy. You're not going to rope post your way into being gifted a state-mandated GF. You're not going to Wojak your way into repealing the 19th Amendment. It's not that incels are permanent losers, it's that they've adopted a losing philosophy. Men will never be seen as victims. There will never be a moment in our lifetimes when men are legitimately viewed as a victim class by the majority, because the most elite men still control the world's capital, and even the lowest man living on the street holds a monopoly on violence over practically any woman walking past him, which means the strategy of accumulating grievances and waiting for a third party to affirm them is a dead end. Not because the grievances aren't real, but because the acknowledgement is never coming. And even if it did, it wouldn't change anything practical. You can't marry or have children with a structural understanding of your disadvantage. Recognizing that policy, not fate, produced these conditions matters, because it means the problem isn't cosmically ordained and could be fixed. But that recognition doesn't change what's in front of you today. The playing field against older, wealthier men is uneven. Dating apps are a waste of time. Expectations have grown faster than opportunities, but there are only two possible responses to these realities. You can decide none of it's worth the effort, and there's never been an easier time to do it. You can walk to the gas station, buy $50 worth of synthetic drugs, walk back to your parents' place, hole up in your room, open anime on your phone and the wank battling station on your laptop, and make peace with life disappearing in front of you. The only alternative isn't optimism, it's just refusal. Refusal to let the conditions you were handed become the permanent terms of your existence. Refusal to settle into avoidant comfort by continuing to attempt difficult things that are socially awkward, physically taxing, intellectually demanding, and keep subjecting yourself to the possibility of failure. Not because effort guarantees anything, but because the man who checks out has already made his bet, while the one who refuses to stop trying has at least given himself a chance.
They forget working in the dark, up to your knees in water, loading coal by hand. They forget the bodies being carried out in blankets, and the women crying because there was no safety in the mines. They forget living in the houses that the company built for you and that you could never leave. They forget being down horrendous, financially cooked, and situation critical, just sitting there gooning. They forget spending your last 20 on Rainbet like it's your villain arc.
Talk to me, talk to me. I'm in this hot box with you, nigga.
talk to me, talk to me.
Let's get fucked up together.
Looks like we're making up for lost time. Need you to spell it out for me. Bossa Nova on all night. It's like a type of alchemy. Introduce me to your best friend. I can come slide right in. A satellite ain't even that far. I kinda wonder where you are. Already know I can leave it alone. You're on my mind. Already gave you the time and the place, so don't be shy. Just come be the man I need. Tell me you got something to give. I want it. I kinda like it when you call me wonderful. Whatever the type of talk it is, come on then. I gotta know you're meant to be the man I need. Talk to me, talk to me, talk to me, talk to me. Be the man that I need, baby. Talk to me, be the man that I need, need. Talk to me, be the man that I need, baby. Talk to me, be the man. I'd like to think you feel the same way, but I can't tell with you sometimes. So baby, let's get on the same page. Stop making me read between the lines. Already know I can leave it alone. You're on my mind. Already gave you the time and the place, so don't be shy. Just come be the man I need. Tell me you got something to give. I want it. I kinda like it when you call me wonderful. Whatever the type of talk it is, come on then. I gotta know you're meant to be the man I need. Talk to me, 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 talk to me.